I met Steve when I was 6 years old. At the time, my life was changing in ways I was too young to understand. I was in a new house, meeting new people, and having to adapt to a place that I was unfamiliar with. When you're 6 years old, that can be pretty overwhelming, and it didn't help that the strange man we were staying with had tattoos, piercings, glasses, and long shaggy hair. However, as time went on, I started to realize that this man wasn't as scary as I made him out to be. He was kind, caring, accepting, and most importantly, taking care of my mom. He would help me with my school projects by building wooden guitars for music class and slingshots for physics with his bare hands. When I sprained my ankle at the age of 8 from his horrible advice of doing a wheelie on a mini dirt bike, he built me a pair of wooden crutches. He taught me how to fish and how to start a 9.9 engine when it craps out on you 3 kilometers offshore. He taught me how to start a fire and how to put it out after he put way too much gasoline on it and it was moments from exploding. He taught me how to cook, how to grill on the barbecue and bake, but thankfully I didn't pick up on his baking skills because his cookies were, put quite frankly, god-awful. He taught me how to snowboard and how not to sprain my wrists doing a 180 on a rail at full speed. He taught me how to drive standard, change my winter tires, do my own oil change, and how to pull somebody out of the ditch in 3 feet of snow off of Settler's Line. However, of all the lessons that Stephen has taught me over the years, the most important was how to love. How to love the materialistic things in your life and be grateful for what you have. For someone that could do it all, Steve was truly the most minimalist person that I knew. I always asked why he wouldn't buy a new truck if he could afford it. Some backstory, he used to pick me up in that navy blue Chevy from the year 200 BC that he was so proud of, and I would always be so embarrassed. I remember him saying how he's just grateful that he can get from one place to another, even if it wasn't in style. I guess you'd have to be a 16-year-old girl getting picked up in high school in front of a bunch of boys to truly understand my confusion by that. He didn't need the fancy gadgets, the fresh paint, and new car smell to find happiness. He just needed the windows down, Sadie in the middle, and me in the passenger seat, with no AC. Steve also taught me how to love the friends and family that you have in your life and how to show them you love them. Steve truly was a girl dad, and I don't think he ever had a single issue with that. I do sometimes think he forgot I was a girl and that I like to smell and look nice. That was evident when we were knees deep in cow crap on multiple occasions trying to herd a cow back into the field. He was much more than my stepdad. He was my best friend. I would go to him before anyone for advice, to tell him what I did the day before, what I plan to do next week, and to tell him about the wild things my friends and I got up to on a night out. He was always so eager to listen. Him and I could be on a road trip for 15 hours and not need to say a single thing to each other to fill the void. My sister Mary, Megan, Mandy, and I were truly blessed to have someone that can make time for all of us without taking any time with him from any of us. Lastly, Steve taught me how to love your significant other. The love that Steve had for my mom was unconditional, passionate, and true. Not a day went by where he didn't show affection, call her stupid nicknames, or show his love and devotion to her. The way he looked at my mom showed me what true love is and what it looks like. I know that the emptiness I feel now will only ever be filled when I find someone myself that has the same qualities that you did, Steve. One of my last favorite memories I have with Steven was when I showed him my new tattoo a few weeks ago. By the way, Mom, I have a tattoo. It's a song lyric from one of my favorite artists that he was unfamiliar with. We sat and listened to the song in silence and talked about its meaning and what it meant to me and why I got it. The next day, when he picked me up, he had the whole album downloaded, and we listened to it the entire way home. I'll never quite figure out how he managed to learn how to download music without any of my help, but nevertheless, it still meant more to me than he knew. Steven, whether you're above flying your plane around the world, on the water getting some wicked air kiteboarding, going far above the speed limit on your motorcycle, or in the kitchen cooking some of your famous turkey legs, I want you to know how grateful I am that I had you in my life and for all the lessons that you have taught me. Not a day will go by that I don't miss your voice and contagious laugh, your selfless nature, your kindness, your wisdom, your love, or even you vacuuming outside my door at 8 a.m. after a night out at the bars. On my last birthday card, Steve wrote as follows: Georgie, live every moment like it's your last. Take lots of chances and swing for the fences. All stuff you do and know very well. All the best and luck at 22. Love always, Steve. I now know how precious time is. I just wish that I realized it sooner. I love you so much, Steven, and thank you for all that you've taught me. Give Sadie a great big hug for me wherever you are.
For those of you who don't know me or haven't seen me in a while, I'm Kevin Johnstone. I'm a longtime childhood buddy of Steve's. And obviously this is a tremendous honor. And you can't do justice to a person like Steve with a few words. It's really a feeling with him and how he made all of us feel. And I can sum up my feelings for Steve in one word: love. I love Steve, as we all did, and most importantly, he always loved us back. And I'll just tell you briefly a few of the things I loved about my friend, and we were the best of friends as kids. And I met Steve at the resort. Oh God, we were probably only 6 years old. Our family vacationed at Elmhirst for 3 weeks a year, and they were always the best 3 weeks of the year. That was until my parents bought a little place just down the road. The chemistry for us, for laughs and general boyhood tomfoolery, was immediate. And we often dragged a willing and sometimes an unwilling Greg into our nonsense. You know, it was tough on our parents. They shoveled us up north, back and forth from Peterborough to Mississauga a little bit between those summer visits. But anyhow, back to what I loved about Steve. I loved his sense of humor and his love of life, really. You know, like the time he pulled the plug out of the boat out by Lower Foley with Greg and I in the boat and claimed it was leaking. And you could probably hear Greg and I bailing from shore while Stephen just laughed and laughed. And like the time we wanted to see how many packs of instant oatmeal we could eat in one sitting. He ate 12, and I think it infamously became known as a bit of the laundry incident. And all I remember was a call up from the basement from Carol and his mother going, "Steven!" as she opened the washing machine to her horror. Like the time Steve and I crashed through the porch door only to find a 6-inch glass shard had gone into his leg. And he somehow found that hilarious. And while laughing, he said, "Boy, is my dad ever going to be mad." Like loading a pellet into Greg's pellet gun and letting his brother unknowingly shoot a hole in their TV. Like driving the garbage truck at the resort and complaining about the damn kids in the road. and the damn kids were 14. I think Steve was 12. His fearlessness, it's not about flying a plane as a teenager or doing a wheelie for the length of a football field down a dirt road at the resort, which I thought was pretty impressive. I was just a city kid, or buying 18-year-olds beer when he was 14. He just went after life, and when he called me and told me he was getting married and inheriting kids, he was so amazingly proud and amazingly ready to jump in and be a parent, and what an amazing father that he turned out to be. That fearlessness reminded me even back then so much of his dad. His love of music, we air guitared and air drummed so much Van Halen and AC/DC using his dad's NAD turntable, you'd have thought we were really playing instruments. And his movie star looks, like Greg and Steve would come to Mississauga now and again, and all my friends and my friends' girlfriends would all end up sitting beside Steve and saying, "Boy, your friend looks like Sting. That spiked hair, that long trench coat. I mean, it really wasn't fair." And the way he always made you feel like no time had ever passed. And we spent a New Year's together at Chemong Lake Lodge, and he and I closed the place, and they actually asked us if we'd be staying for breakfast. And that was after the first time we hadn't seen each other in a while, and that was always the way it was with him. My favorite picture on my phone is a picture of us 4 years ago at the resort. I had come up with a couple of friends to fish, really just reminisce. I loved going back to the resort, and Steve joined us for dinner. And if you could see the picture, the joy on both of our faces at being together again is hard to quantify. And I had the privilege of coming to Steve's 50th again, and it was just like time had never passed. And I'm sure he made all of you feel that way as well. He was just a life force of pure joy and pure goodness. And when I heard of Steve's passing, I, like all of you, was heartbroken. We were on the cusp of reconnecting. And then it really hit me that with a person like Steve, you're never truly disconnected. You're just apart for a while. And we loved him, and he always loved us back. And I can think of nothing else to say except that it's a privilege to have known him and a privilege to feel this bad because he had to leave us. Maybe for me, a quote from a movie might just sum it up best. I never had any friends like the ones I had when I was 12. Jesus, does anyone? Goodbye, Steve. I love you, pal.
The first time I ever saw kiting of any kind, I thought it was the coolest thing on the planet that anybody could do, and I was not going to stop until I learned how. And Kite Weekend was the brainchild of my local riding group here, and we just thought we wanted to come up with a good excuse to get together on a winter weekend and try and share some experience with people.
I feel very blessed in having the opportunity to know and become friends with Steve Elmhirst. He had so much to offer, always smiling, always interested in what's new in your life. He welcomed the unknown and embraced the excitement that it could bring. Steve and I met many years ago on a frozen lake on a cold wintry day. I was making a great attempt at kite skiing. It must have been good enough to catch his eye. He approached me and asked if one could do this snowboarding. And I said if one knew how to snowboard, and he replied, of course he could. Well, that bit of humor and Steve's drive to learn something new started Steve's next evolution and mine as well. Not too sure how Caroline felt about that. Anyway, it was not long after Steve was showing me tricks and how he excelled to be quite a great kiteboarder. He had a great passion for the sport, not just in the winter, but also in the summer on the water. He had a drive like no other. One day after a great session in the wintertime at Elmhirst, Steve, Blake, and myself were sitting around, possibly having a cold beverage or two. An idea was created. Kite Weekend. Who would have thought of it taking off like it did? In no time at all, Steve rounded up some great people to make it work. Doug, Blake, Bruce, Brian, and myself. What a great group of people that wanted to share their passion for the sport and show off the resort at the same time. Over the years, I've noticed that Steve had a couple unique traits. How he could sit in a chair with one leg on top of the other. I'm not sure how appendages were meant to be bent that way, but they did with him. He constantly brushed his hair back with his hands, even after he got his ponytail cut off. Which, by the way, I'm glad he did, because now he doesn't look like Fabio anymore. Anyway, after a happy hour one kite weekend, there was some beer left in the keg, so Steve brought it to the volunteers' cottage. I don't know how he was able to keep his innermost feminine side in check while serving draft beer from a teapot. Our cottage did not have a pitcher, so Steve, being the person that he is, always wanting to please, grabbed the only thing that would hold an abundance of fluid, thus the teapot, and he's running around refilling everybody's glasses till the keg was emptied. Quite a weekend that one was. Another thing that he did, he catered his own 50th birthday party. What a gathering of people that was. And it was a wonderful day, and everything was tremendous. Thank you, Steve, for that. I have read many tributes this week to Steve, and I agree with all of them. So I would like to say, Steve, you were taken far too early. We have lots that we could learn from you, and lots we would like to have shared with you in the future. To your family, you're in my thoughts and prayers. I cannot imagine what you're going through. I have added a small video of Steve my Anna was lucky enough to have recorded just days before her passing. And I'll close with, rest in peace, North Shore. I will truly miss you.
Good morning. I'm honored to have been asked by Greg Elmhirst to say a few words about my friendship with Steve. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ron McIntyre, and I've known Steve since we were probably toddlers. But our friendship was firmly established once we realized we both had an appetite for small-town rural anarchy. And we came by that anarchy honestly. Anyone that grew up in Otonabee or lived in Otonabee that knew when our fathers were young can attest to that. There's simply too many stories of the capers that Steve and I got up to share, and most of them I wouldn't be able to share anyway. Let's just say those years represent the building blocks of our friendship. Steve had a way with words like no one else I've ever known. In fact, his voice has been rattling around in my head for days since his passing. To amuse himself and around him, he had a very humorous way of twisting phrases, words, and song lyrics that were uniquely Steve. For example, instead of using the rock and roller phrase, "for sure," he spiced it up with a little bit of Snoop Dogg, and it became "for shizzle." And then there was local greasy spoon advertising that would say "all day breakfast," which Steve would reply, "All day breakfast? Who's got time for that shit?" Then there were completely different definitions to words entirely, like the word mustache. Steve would say, "I must ask you a question." For years, we haven't been able to pass an all-day breakfast sign without breaking into, "Who's got time for that shit?" Steve was an individualist. Aside from the way he creatively butchered the English language, he expressed himself in unique and wonderful ways. From his various hairstyle phases, inspired by the likes of Sting, Bob Marley, Peaky Blinders, and of course, who can forget the Fabio years, to his tattoos, and to the people that he surrounded himself with. Steve cut his own path and was happy to take anyone else along with him who was eager and willing to join him on the ride. Steve had a soft spot for helping others in need, both the two-legged and the four-legged variety. Whether stray kittens found on the property, his own beloved dogs, or friends like us wandering home in the spring. Our first stop after crossing the border was always Elmhirst Resort, and in true Steve style, he would have a care package ready for us to get us through quarantine. And it wasn't just a standard milk and eggs either. It was a full-blown farm-to-table gourmet food box, including some of Steve's signature additions for us to try, like a homemade demi-glaze or a tomahawk steak cut from Elmhirst's own Black Angus beef. He was always generous with his time and with his heart. This past October, we rented a beach house in Florida. Steve and Caroline, my cousin Rick, and his wife Lonnie joined us. It was always a challenge to spend a significant amount of time with Steve and Caroline, as they were always so busy working long hours at the resort, so it was usually a quick visit. The week in Florida, we had them all to ourselves. It was such a great bonding time for us all, and looking back, those memories are such a precious gift. And the conclusion is always the difficult part, and I have a couple of thoughts. Steve, you've touched the hearts and made so many meaningful connections with so many people. I think that's a sign of a life well lived. And there's a quote from Robert Louis Stevenson that I think sums up Steve's life. "The man is a success who has lived well, loved much, and laughed often." You hit all marks, Steve.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve's brother, Greg, and I have the honor of saying a few words about Steve on this solemn occasion. I want to start, however, by just saying thank you to all of the friends and family members who've been such a wonderful support to us. The outpouring of well wishes, condolences, and support has made the burden much easier to bear, and we're extremely grateful. Now, a few words about Steve. Just for contextual purposes, I'm going to talk about myself just for a second. Steve and I were apples that fell from the same tree, but if we were suits, we would be cut from quite different cloth, and I was generally thought of as being perhaps the slightly more straight-laced, maybe the slightly more responsible sibling, and later in life, I'm sometimes accused of being a little bit dry and businessy. Nonetheless, I did some reading that actually helped give me some valuable context on this occasion. This writing actually separates people into personality types by color. There's 4 colors. There's red, yellow, blue, and green. Interestingly, while this sounds like kind of the usual corporate psychobabble, there's actually links that go all the way back to the ancient Greeks and to the Aztecs. So starting with red. Red are the leaders and the decision makers in a situation. In Aztec culture, this was fire. These were the warriors and the leaders. So how does this apply to Steve? Well, what person could could get behind the yoke of an aircraft and fly it? Or what person could strap a board to their feet and jump in the water and get towed out by nothing but the wind than someone with the red? You also saw this in Steve's early life in his devotion to motorcycling. He loved his sport bikes. We've already heard about some of his motorcycle stunts. These included jumping off the top of a cliff in his shorts and a helmet and nothing else. It just inspired awe in all of us. Next is yellow. Yellows amongst us are the salespeople, the storytellers, the characters. In Aztec times, this was the wind. These people would breeze into the community, they'd cause a stir, and then kind of keep moving. Steve, we've already explored a little bit his phases with clothes, with hair, with music. He had an infectious laugh. He had a very quirky sense of humor. And also, he was able to bring new ideas to his work at the resort, specifically selling special wedding events to brides. Steve would say, sure, we can do that. And then eventually we just figure out how to do it. So Steve definitely had a splash of yellow too. Next are the serious folks, the blues. These are the folks that are cautious and thorough. They're the people that read the last page of the instruction manual. In Aztec times, this was water. Very powerful, but needed to be directed and controlled, focused in a way to achieve a goal. Steve showed lots of examples of blue behavior, particularly when it came to his attention to kiting equipment, tearing down motorcycles and putting them back together. He's very self-reliant that way. And also, when it came to flight planning, preparing himself for his new career as a commercial pilot, Steve had a wide streak of blue in him as well. Finally, is green. And I sort of saved green for last because I think this is the color that Steve exhibited the most. In our society, greens are the people that listen to everyone, the people that everyone turns to for help, and the people that try and make everyone happy. In the Aztec community, this was earth. These were the people that held the village together and made it function. And when you think about the way Steve was the rescuer-in-chief for all of the staff members and family members who hit the ditch in their cars and needed a hand out, solutions of all sorts. Steve was always the first one to stick his hand up, constantly advocating for better staff meals for his co-workers. Steve sort of held us all together, and was a very calming influence and a very healthy influence on everyone around him. And this was never more clear than in the devotion that he showed to the young ladies that he helped raise: Mandy, Mary, and Georgia, and of course Megan. Steve also provided a gathering place, probably the first and most popular gathering place outside of work for coworkers, friends, and family. As much as possible, he tried to get them all together at the same time. So when I reflect on Steve and all the things that he taught me over the course of his life, Steve seemed a little bit restless. He was a little perhaps stubborn. Certainly stubborn would be one of the personality traits that would go with at least one of those colors somewhere along the way. And I always thought of Steve as a complex person and a really kind of a surprising person. But when I considered Steve in this context, I suddenly realized that Steve was a complete person. He had an amazing range of capabilities that he brought together, and largely in the service of helping those around him and doing it with a unique sense, a unique way of expressing himself. An important piece in making Steve a complete person, though, is his wife, Caroline. Steve, I think, cured a lot of his restlessness when he had a life partner that he was really passionate about, like Caroline, and he always thrived in the home that they made together. Steve was taken from us. It's hard to feel like it wasn't way too early, and it was very sudden. So it's hard to see the place where you feel good about the things that he's done. It's hard to look at what he did here without feeling sad right now. But over time, I'm sure that all of the things Steve did for his home, for our family, for the business, for his friends and coworkers, as we look at those over time, that will ease and they'll draw us closer together and closer to the property that we all love. I'm very grateful for all the years that I had with Steve. I'm grateful for what he taught me. I'm grateful for all the laughs we had together and for all the adventures and all the friends and all the things that I experienced with Steve. I'm very grateful. I bid Steve farewell. I love you and will never forget you.